On this episode of the ObjectSharp Podcast, JR gets ObjectSharp's resident Power Platform expert Mike Walker's advice on how to decide whether to build a solution on Power Platform or use .NET. Plus, Mike shares the lesson he learned as he was ramping up on the Power Platform and what helped him accelerate his learnings.
Hello and welcome to the ObjectSharp Podcast. Today, I actually have Mike Walker on the episode with me. And Mike, this is your first time on the show, so welcome to the ObjectSharp Podcast. And maybe give yourself a little bit of an intro. Tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you for the invite. I'm Mike Walker, consultant with ObjectSharp, and I specialize in the Power Platform as well as I do some project management work on the side. And I'm very happy that I was invited to be part of this podcast. So it's very nice to meet everybody.
Yeah, well, it's awesome to have you here. And one of the reasons why I asked you to join is actually because you've been doing a lot of work and a lot of talking out in webinars and stuff like that about the Power Platform. And one of the things that's always sort of come up for me when talking about the Power Platform is that it's kind of like, well, is it a programming platform? Is it not? Like, should I be doing that over custom development? Should I not? And it's always like this choice that you have to go back and forth, I feel. So I was hoping that today we can demystify some of that a little bit and kind of get your thoughts on when it might actually be good to go Power Platform route, when it might be good to go custom dev route. What some of the differences are, like what are some of the gotchas that you've seen in your projects, and kind of go from there. How does that sound?
Sounds awesome.
All right. So why don't we just start in general, right? Because Power Platform, is built of so many different aspects and so many different systems. So maybe in like a minute or two, give us like the overview of the platform, what it is, and maybe even what it's not.
Sure. The Power Platform is really, four core pillars. You have your Power Apps, you have Power Automate, you have Power Virtual Agents, which are your chatbots, which are lots of fun. And of course, my favorite is Power BI because I love reporting. I love data. I'm a bit of a nerd like that. So I love Power BI. I love trying to see how I can make data sing. But those are the four key components of the platform. Microsoft's done an amazing job of trying to combine all four of those pillars together. And because they're so extensible and interactive, what's the right word I'm looking for? They can interact quite nicely with each other and quite easily. It's an amazing ecosystem. And Microsoft has also done an amazing job of fostering that ecosystem so that there's an amazing community of people, developers, citizen developers, professional developers that are there supporting each other as they try to use the platform. So
nice. I'm sure I've watched your webinars, so I'm sure that you can, that was like the 2-minute version of like 20-minute talk of just what the Power Platform is. So that's awesome. Thank you for that. So why don't we just start off like right at the top, like before going into the nitty gritty, like what's one of the first things that someone needs to consider when trying to decide? It's like, do I build, like, let's say I have a particular business challenge that I need to solve. One of the first things that I'm going to do is kind of basically say, well, what platform should I put it on, right? So what are some of the first thoughts that should go into your head in terms of saying, maybe I should go Power Platform over custom development?
I would probably, I always try to tell my clients to start small. Find a nice, just like with any project, if you're adopting a new project management methodology, or if you're trying to start a small proof of concept, you want to start small and you see if this platform is actually going to be able to work for you. And what I love about the platform is almost everybody has a Microsoft 365 license. So there's a strong chance that you already have with that license the core Office 365 Power Platform license that goes along with it. So more often than not, it's a matter of talking to the right people and turning it on so you can start to play with the platform and see, hey, how can I do this? more often than not, that initial discovery is what lends itself to additional development, further proofs of concept, and just building applications that you'll see will naturally and organically grow over time.
I know for me, a lot of times, like just my own thinking, I always thought about it as like a kind of like almost like a prototyping platform, like like you said, proof of concept. But I mean, some of the things that you've done on the Power Platform, these are production level applications. So it's not like it's just a prototyping type of platform. So, like what does that even look like when you go to build a production scale application on the Power Platform? Like, how does that, I don't know, how do I get over this idea that it's just a proof of concept platform?
Yeah, that's a great question, because people often used to think the same way of the older Office suite, 15, 20 years ago, when people would try to automate processes using Excel and Access as much as possible. It is absolutely 100% enterprise grade. And you often see these enterprise grade level tools and templates available to you on like Microsoft's App Source that you can download and see. And large companies are leveraging these tools that are free to use. It requires licensing, but a perfect example being Microsoft's Return to the Workplace solution. It is enterprise grade. There are many companies globally that are using this application for thousands and thousands and thousands of users. And it's built using Canvas apps, which a lot of people think, hey, well, you know what, a Canvas app is something you would build for a department of 20 or 50 people, maybe even 100. But no, these applications, when architected correctly, can serve thousands and thousands of users on many time zones on a global scale. So yeah, it's definitely enterprise grade, but it also supports that individual that's just trying to dip their toe in the water and say, can I do this with a Canvas app? And more often than not, you can.
It's like, as you're talking about it, the thing that I'm thinking to myself is how many times either I've been witness to it or done it myself, where it's kind of like you build an app on the side of your desk, you host it on your computer, and it's like on a server, right? Like Access databases were notorious for that, right? So what it sounds like, yeah, you're raising your hand like, been there and done that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So what it sounds like, though, so from what you're saying is that it's a little bit of that, but at least it's hosted up in the Microsoft data centers, in just out of the box. It sounds like it has all of these enterprise level stuff that you could, like, from a development perspective, it would be like building that app on the side of your desk, but at least it's hosted, it's scalable, it's secure, from an infrastructure perspective.
Absolutely. And that's where I also have to say that Microsoft's done an amazing job with respect to implementing those guardrails, so that it's not like the wild, wild west where it used to be years ago, where people are building Access, databases and Excel tools, and then all of a sudden that individual leaves the organization, and who maintains it? And IT's right. Like, I ain't touching it.
Yeah.
You're on your own. Yeah. I think they used to call them business unit applications or something like that. But anyway,
and end user computing apps.
EUCs. That's right, EUCs. I forgot about that. And it became a huge issue years ago, because when regulations like SOX came down, you actually had to list every EUC that played a part in creating that financial number. And you had to have, all your typical SDLC controls, version controls around those applications. And where, the Power Platform really steps in here is the Power Platform gives you those tools to be able to manage version control. There's some core tools there to manage that. But at the same time, the Power Platform, when you install things like Microsoft's Center of Excellence or the COE toolkit, when you install that in your tenant, it gives IT that lens or that view over everything that's going on with the Power Platform in your organization. Who's sharing which apps with which departments. You can put guardrails and checkpoints in play so that you can't share an app until it's been vetted. You can control the connectors so that someone doesn't say, hey, you know what, every 5 minutes I want to automatically send something to Twitter.
Right.
Or
at
things
all.
like that would exactly stuff that would scare a CEO or COO or CFO, anyone at the C level. So you can implement these guardrails, and Microsoft makes it all available for these large organizations so that they have those controls in play, so that it doesn't just automatically become the wild, wild west. So it's amazing. So, all those issues that we'd had before around, just people building applications, nobody knew about them, nobody knew who really owned them. You now have that lens, as an organization to say, okay, this is who has what, this is who they're sharing it with, and this is what it's doing. And you can also even extend it further to look at the analytics of the applications to say how many people are using it, what kind of activity is it generating, what systems is it connecting with. So it's very powerful, and that's where I got to say Microsoft has really stepped up to the table for these organizations to say, don't worry, we got your back. We have these tools in play. We just have to implement them, and we'll work with you to make sure that you're comfortable with this platform. So
yeah, so that's definitely more than the app built on the side of the desk controls for sure.
yes.
Why don't we flip it to the other side? So, because up until now, all I've heard is like why this could work or why Power Platform, is awesome for, a good place to start and all that kind of stuff. What if we flipped it around? When is it not a good idea to go down the Power Platform? Just at a high level. I know, like, I'll ask you a couple of things that are a little bit more specific shortly so that we can, debunk a couple of myths there. But just in general, like as a non-starter, do not go Power Platform if.
Great question. I've seen Power Platform do things that I didn't think it could do in the past. But, just like you have to make sure you have the right hammer for the job in construction, Power Platform isn't always going to be the right language, just like the right platform, just like C# isn't always the right language, or JavaScript isn't. You really do have to take a look at, what is the client's vision of what they want to do? What's the maturity of the client in terms of being able to, how comfortable are they with the Power Platform, or are they more of a pure .NET DevOps organization? And you also have to look at the complexity of the application. If you don't have the time to organically grow with the Power Platform and you need to knock something quickly out the door, you're either going to bring in Power Platform expertise, which we can of course naturally help with, or you need to look at the tooling that is really going to help drive this. If the tooling is complex, if the solution is complex, you're not going to build a trading application in the Power Platform as a perfect example. So depending on the complexity, the touch points, everything that it has to interact with, sometimes that .NET application or that .NET approach is the right way to do it. But complexity, I find, is often the driving factor, as well as the maturity of the organization with how comfortable they are with the Power Platform. So you have to look at both of those things to determine which is the right way to go. But absolutely, application complexity is definitely probably the real driving factor of whether or not a solution should be done on the Power Platform or something else. I'd have to, because I got to say, I've seen some pretty interesting things that have been built on a large enterprise scale, but with the Power Platform. But yeah, perfect example coming from my background, I would not be building for a trading application for the derivatives market using Canvas app. So.
Right, when you need like split second, like execute on the spot because milliseconds count type of thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, again, the Power Platform will integrate nicely. It's great for connecting disparate systems that don't talk to each other. It's great for automating processes. And you can build some very complex applications using it, but in the end, it is definitely, if you need like a very unique single purpose application, extremely high performance, millisecond timing for things, then yeah, I would probably look at something C#.net.
Cool. So let's dig deeper into like kind of comparing and contrasting, and just to get your thoughts on some of the gotchas that you've seen as you've been working with the platform. One of the first things that I think about when kind of thinking about applications and whatnot, and you've touched on it a little bit before, but let's talk about architecture, and let's talk about like what are some of the gotchas that you've encountered when it comes to, let's talk about architecture in general, and then maybe even specifically enterprise architecture, because you've brought it up earlier. What are some of the things that are not as obvious that you're kind of like, hey, pay attention to this?
Absolutely. Anyone coming from a developer background or an architecture background will definitely sit down before they start to develop an application, and they will look at the problem in front of them. I should say opportunity, it's not a problem. The opportunity in front of them, and they'll go, okay, if I'm going to design this, based on what I understand at this point in time, I'm going to architect the application in terms of database design, the flows. This is where I think information should be coming in and coming out. These are the types of connections I think I'm going to need. And they'll sit down and they spend the time to architect. When you have, especially an application that requires that level of attention, sometimes when you're coming from a non-professional background, it's not as evident that you need to do that. Especially if you come from, like, for example, an intermediate Excel background and you want to start developing on the platform, you might not have that lens to say, oh, these are my primary keys, these are my foreign keys with the tables. How is this going to work? Should I be splitting this into 2 or 3 tables versus one monolithic table? How should I be handling this? So from an architect, that's the database level of architecture, but then there's also the application level of architecture. Someone coming from a professional background will have the insight to say, you know what, I think if we sequence the flow of information in this particular way, we'll have a very streamlined process. It'll be very efficient, and we won't experience any bottlenecks or potentially even data issues. I think we've talked in the past about, for example, the Ticketmaster scenario, where when you go to reserve tickets on Ticketmaster, they'll reserve that block for you for 30 seconds.
Right.
And a professional developer will think about that in terms of what kind of application are they looking for. Like, hey, I need to block this information so nobody else can steal it while I'm working on it. Whereas someone not coming from that background might sit there and think, you know what, I'm gonna write this little piece of code here, and as soon as I write that piece of code, I'll just move on. But really, they might not be thinking about, well, really that write operation should happen later in the process versus in the middle of the process. So maybe they should be collecting all the information and then writing it versus doing it, in chunks along the way. So the developer will have that mindset thinking about it because that's their natural background, whereas the citizen developer would eventually encounter that as they're building their application and rolling out, and they're going, oh, you know what? This is going to be a bit of an issue as we roll it out to hundreds or thousands of users, and we're getting lots of write operations at once. So having that lens from a database design and application architecture, in terms of that flow is very, very important to consider. So the citizen developer does a great job. It might just take a little bit longer to get there and encounter that issue if they haven't seen something like that before. Whereas the professional developer would have that experience to go out, you know what, this could be an issue down the road. So we need to address that now.
Hey, so just as a side note, because you brought it up, tell me more about citizen developer. Like, what I've actually never heard of that term. What does a citizen developer mean to you?
You know what? It's kind of funny. I was reading a couple of articles over the last few days about what is a citizen developer. And Microsoft has kind of really adopted that phrase, even though it's been around for a while. Historically, 15 plus years ago, the citizen developer was someone who would write Excel macros for an Excel workbook to automate a process, right? So they spend an hour a day doing something. You know what? I can automate that, and they might write a macro to do it. That I would still consider that individual a citizen developer, because you know what, they had a process, they automated it a little bit, and they were a little bit of code to do it. Same thing with access. If you had a little bit of access experience, you might do something there as well too. So I would class them as citizen developers. Years ago, IT might have seen them as, oh my God, the cowboys that are just building whatever
The
it is.
end user computing people.
You see, exactly. Those darn people. But but the citizen developer now, now that they have a platform and a tool set to be able to design and develop applications on their own, and IT has the toolkit as well to implement the guardrails and the controls. The citizen developer now is anyone that can automate any process with tools that they have. And Microsoft has actually given the citizen developer, the average person, and they're usually UI UX people or BAs or business systems analysts that now have the ability, instead of having to rely on a developer, they may now have the ability to develop what they want to develop or need to develop using the Power Platform. So it's not that we're transitioning that work away. It's that more often than not, development teams are overloaded in organizations because IT, especially in the last year more than any other year, they've become Atlas, like they're carrying the world on their shoulders, and they have so much work to do. This now empowers the BA, the designer, to be able to develop applications to still provide value to the business, while not necessarily and supporting IT with work that maybe IT just doesn't have the time to do. So, and they can still develop that partnership with IT to say, hey, you know what, I'd like to do this. Can you maybe, ensure that I've got the right security credentials so that I can actually develop this report, or that I can build this application so that people can see what's going on. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time.
So that kind of gets me thinking. So going back to our stuff from before, you were talking about architecture. So probably and kind of comparing and contrasting what the different backgrounds would look at. So that kind of got me thinking, is like, okay, what are some of the other things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought about if I were not a professional developer? What about scale? Right. So like with apps back in the day, right, when you put it on the side of your computer, the scale was the extent to which your computer can handle the load and how many network connections you can have at any given point in time. Now that the app is not there, it's in these crazy data centers, and we were talking about earlier enterprise grade. I would assume that somehow, some way, scale needs to factor into the conversation. So what do we need to think about there?
That's a fantastic point. So scale is a huge factor, especially when you start rolling out enterprise grade applications, but even to the citizen developer, it's something to keep in mind. I always love to take the approach of, let's get it working, prove that it works, and then refine it. But one of the things that Microsoft tries to stress is always pay attention to the efficiency of your applications and the efficiency of your Power Automate flows. And they say that largely because you get depending on your licensing, you get a limited number of API calls that you can make. So, and your Power Automate flows can eat up a lot of those API calls if you have massive flows.
Right.
So whereas the professional developer might sit there and think, hey, you know what, I'm going to make this very tight and efficient, and I'm going to do this in 4 steps. Whereas the citizen developer is going to take, rightfully so, and I would do the same, is going to say, I'm going to make this work. And then I'm going to sit there and go, okay, how can I tighten it up after the fact? Which is still a fine approach to take, but we always have to pay attention to the efficiency of these flows to make sure as we scale it out that we make them as tight as possible, and we're not making more calls than we absolutely need to as we're building our Power Automate flows and with our applications. So from a scaling point of view, you don't want to have this 50-step Power Automate flow that thousands of users are going to be running. You'll get hit pretty hard if you're not careful. So
And I think what you're kind of alluding to is that the scale will be there. Like, it's not like things won't run, and it's not like things won't run well. It's just going to cost you.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll either you're going to get a nice hefty bill or you're going to get throttled. It'll be one or the other in terms of performance. So it's always good to pay attention to what you're building, and eventually over time, definitely you should see if there's always ways to improve and tighten things up with your processes, and Microsoft gives the tools where you can monitor your flows. How long are they taking? How many steps? And all that infrastructure is there for the user to be able to do this. So it's, there's no excuse to not being able to tighten up your code. Sometimes people take the set it and forget it. Oh, it's working. I'll worry about it if it breaks, but it never hurts to revisit things, or as we call in the agile world, technical debt.
Right.
So you want to pay attention to that.
I think what you're highlighting, though, is not so much that it may be a good thing. You're kind of suggesting once you get things working, go back and refine, right? Like, because it's not going to necessarily stop working, right?
Correct.
So unless you have that specific forcing function to force yourself to go in there and kind of say, oh, I should probably make this better, things are going to run, and they're going to run well. It's just that they will run well, and then you're going to get a cost to it. So it's like, right?
Exactly. What it's one of the features that I love about Power Automate is when you see a process taking long, you can actually, take a deep dive into that particular execution, and it'll show you how many seconds each step takes. And so you can see, wow, this one's taking 35 seconds. That's going to be an issue if you're running it for thousands of users. So that's your opportunity to step in and refine things. So.
And it's kind of interesting too, as you were talking about it, I was thinking, wow, so because you have all of that tooling there, and you have all the data and the insights and whatever, effectively, in as much as you are a developer, citizen or professional, doesn't really matter at this point, but so that's the dev part, but there's a certain element of ops to it also, right? Because it's kind of like, in a typical, let's call it a custom dev type of environment, right? You would build an app, a developer would build an app and then ship it off somewhere. It would be, it would be operated and supported by some sort of team or the original team. But there's a DevOps process to it that's sort of become just the thing that you do. Like, you don't develop it any other way. Here, there's DevOps built into it as well if you choose to participate in that. Right? It's kind of like the information is there, but you don't necessarily have to do anything about it. And if you're building it, like you were saying, where it's like either, for a department or for an enterprise, like, it doesn't really matter. That's probably one of the things that you have to think about as well, is that in as much as you're thinking about dev, you have to think about the ops too.
Absolutely. 100% nailed it right on the head. The platform gives you the tools, and it's whether or not you choose to use them and at what level you choose to use them. So from a DevOps point of view, you can, some departments will just have one environment and they just sit there and they'll build all their apps in the one environment. When we start to engage our clients, we always recommend having at least two. Have a development environment and have a production environment. So that way you can play as much as you want in development and promote to production when it's ready. Lately, we've really been pushing, especially for enterprises, you want that minimum of 3 environments, because you want to separate your development from your test. Again, it all depends on the size of the organization and how many people are using your applications. So that minimum of 3. But what I really love is with the Power Platform, it gives you that ability to say, you know what, I'm just going to maintain my apps in one environment. I can expand it and still manage my DevOps from, a 3 environment perspective, or I can export my solutions from dev, all my code, and then deploy it as a managed or unmanaged solution to test in production. But they do also give you the tools to implement Azure DevOps or leverage GitHub to manage your flow, which not a lot of organizations, once they realize when they have enterprise level apps, they go, you know what, we're using DevOps here for our other enterprise grade applications. Why don't we use it here for our Power Platform? And you can absolutely do that. We do have some internal expertise here at ObjectSharp that can do that. And you know what, to get to that level it makes sense. When you have thousands and thousands of users, you want the controls. You don't want people manually exporting solutions. You want to have those pipelines in play where with the appropriate permissions and gates in place that you can deploy your solutions just like you would any other .NET application. So it scales based on the need of the organization. If you want to manage things locally, or if you want to go with a full enterprise grade DevOps solution, you can do either approach, and any combination or any level within that scale or spectrum is there, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, man, I started this conversation thinking that it was a proof of concept platform, right? Like, because that's like, for me, that's all I've done in Power Automate and the Power Apps and stuff like that, is just playing around, testing ideas. Little did I know that, it could actually develop into these widespread type of applications. And then to add the source control on top of that, I mean, that's required in pretty much every even small, medium-sized businesses now. I mean, like version control and all that kind of stuff used to be something that only the big shops did. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, like, it's a realization right now that it's just what you do, right? You have to version control your stuff, especially if you're going to give it to someone else to use other than yourself, right?
Absolutely. It's that automation component. In the end, you don't want to be reliant on a couple of people that really understand the manual DevOps process with the Power Platform. If you can remove that dependency on individuals, and you have a process in play and your DevOps pipelines are constructed and they're ready to go, that dependency is now no longer required on those individuals. They are free to go do other applications and manage the deployment of other items as well too. And in this case, whoever needs to deploy for whatever reason has the ability to do it, as long as they have the right permissions and entitlements to do it. So it's amazing how supportive that whole ecosystem is to be able to scale at whatever a client's needs would be. It's impressive.
Hey, so thinking about, since you said ecosystem, what about extensibility, right? So, when we're doing custom development, it's relatively easy to go and, either custom develop something or pick up some packages or some open source and stuff like that, and build other functionality. And anything I need to, like, what would I need to think about here in terms of that extensibility on the Power Platform?
What I love about, there's a couple of areas of extensibility that I've focused on recently. One is, I love how within Power Automate you can create your own custom connectors. Oh. It's really neat. You can go in and there are probably close to 400 connectors now within Power Automate, and it's constantly growing every month as large organizations are submitting their connectors in to be available through the Power Platform. But if you find a connector that doesn't exist, or say, for example, you have something internal within your organization and you want to connect to Power Automate too. Let's say you have an application that has an API. It has some endpoints exposed, and you want to leverage those endpoints through a Canvas app or anything. It could even be for Power BI for reporting if you want to go that route. So the idea here is you can create your own custom connectors. I had fun not that long ago playing with creating some custom connectors just to see what I could do with Spotify. All of Spotify's endpoints are exposed, and just to see what was possible. The art of the possibility, as I always say. And it was fairly straightforward. There was lots of information out on the internet on how to do it. And I was able to create some neat connectors and use Power Automate to be able to control and create playlists through a Canvas app. So it was a lot of fun. So you can basically create your own custom connectors to connect to on-premise systems if they have APIs that are exposed, and you can extract information, or you can connect to their backend databases as well. Most database connectors are there already out of the box with Power Automate, but again, if you want to leverage an API, you can do that. You can create your own custom connectors with actions, and you can extract or write information to the API as you see fit. So it's extremely extensible, and that's where that partnership with Power Platform developers and IT comes into play, because you need to have that communication between the two groups to know how to properly interact with the API that the IT group might have created, as well as with the application on the Power Platform side that needs to integrate with that API. So.
And so I'm just thinking, even like to get into that though, is that something that effectively you have to have that strong developer background to get into building these connectors, or that's something that again anybody can do?
It is a little complex. It can be a little challenging initially for say a citizen developer to come in and start to use it, but there is so much information. If you're willing to do the research, there is so much information on the internet that basically will walk you through how to create a custom connector and things to consider. So it might be daunting at first, where a citizen developer might sit there and go, I don't know where to start. There is so much information out there on how to get started that it really shouldn't be that daunting. It might be at first, but once you get that first connector up and running and you're calling an endpoint, you've got an action lined up that you can leverage within your flow or within your application, it starts that ball rolling. So it might be a little daunting at first because it's something that you haven't tried before, but we've all been there in terms of getting started. So it's not that scary once you've done the first one. You go, okay, I know I know where my potholes and roadblocks are. So and then there's so many people out there that can answer your questions if you have questions.
Yeah, and when in doubt, people will call you.
Absolutely. I remember when I was doing that connection with Spotify and was playing with it, and just out of curiosity, I pinged the developer that had actually tried it the first time, and he responded very quickly. So it was awesome. So yeah, so there's a whole ecosystem. They can call, you can reach out to ObjectSharp. There's people, there's tons of articles on the internet that can point you in the right direction. So again, it's just getting past that whole concept of, or idea that, you know what, somebody's already done this somewhere, right? And so either I can find it or I can talk to somebody who would probably know how to do it. So it's out there. You just have to get past it.
So since you have done this a lot, and you work with the platform every day, and you probably have questions or get asked questions and stuff like that, just to kind of close us off for this episode, what would be the kind of the one big gotcha that you had, or that someone had asked you that was kind of like mind blowing to you? Like, if everybody knew this, then their work on Power Platform would be that much easier.
That's a great question. Set me up. What would be the one gotcha? I think for me, the one gotcha would probably be, don't try to do everything on your own, right? Don't try to sit there and pound your head on the table trying to figure out this solution on your own. And for me, the gotcha was how much information is actually out there. I tried to fight through flows on my own and figure it out. And you know what? Microsoft's done an amazing job providing templates and templates that you can use to get started with if you're not familiar with if you're just new to the whole platform. So there's amazing templates on Canvas apps and on Power Automate. And when you're getting started and you realize, the template's probably going to cover 65 to 70% of what I want to do, getting those remaining pieces kind of resolved and working the way you want it to can be a little challenging. But trying to figure it out on your own, and you will be banging your head on a wall when you're first getting started with the platform, trying to figure out, why doesn't this work? Oh, well, it's because you think you're pulling a display name, and really you just need the number, not the display name that's coming behind the scenes. And that's why your flow isn't working. You think you're supposed to be getting a value of this when really it's returning this value. So don't give up. I've been there. I have beaten my head on the desk many times. But yeah, don't hesitate to reach out into, do a search. You'll find somebody who's actually done probably 95% of the work, carried it that extra little bit to get it to closure. But really, don't give up. It's the information is out there. You just have to, do a little searching, and then that aha moment will come to you, and you'll be like, aha, that's how it is. I figured it out, and you feel so much better about it. So let's not give up, and trust me, you'll get the answer you're looking for. So it's tough when you try to do it all on your own and thinking, oh, you know what? These Power Automate flows are simple. It's just drag and drop and connect it like Lego. I used to call it adult Lego, right? Where you can just drag and drop the boxes in and connect them.
Absolutely.
Right? Because they're nice, colorful boxes, and you're just customizing them. But there is some logic behind it, and so understanding how to dig a little lower, like get past that first layer and attacking it and not giving up, you will get your answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the insights and kind of going through all that stuff with me. I know certainly for me, again, remember I started this conversation with I know Power Platform can do all of these things, but it's just a POC type of platform. Clearly that's not. So thank you for all the insights. Thank you for being on the episode. And hopefully as the platform continues to grow and you find out cool things, we'll have you back and you can tell us all about the adventures of all the new stuff coming up. So thanks so much for coming on the episode, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
This podcast is brought to you by ObjectSharp. Whether migrating workloads to Azure or building net new cloud-native solutions leveraging the power of PaaS, serverless, .NET, or the Power Platform, or implementing DevOps and Agile practices within teams or across the entire organization, ObjectSharp has been helping companies with their digital transformations for over 20 years. Learn more at ObjectSharp.com or connect on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. ObjectSharp is a CentralLogic company.